Hello, this is the Mushroom Wizard, and I'm returning once again with another presentation regarding the mushrooms found in Saskatchewan and the ways in which we go about identifying and finding those mushrooms. So, this presentation is a companion presentation to the last one called Dangerous Delicacies of Saskatchewan. And once again, we're dealing with this gray area between edibility and toxicity. And there are some mushrooms that kind of exist in this strange little spot where they are toxic, but through various preparation techniques, people still consume them fairly regularly, or else they are toxic and people consume them regardless of that toxicity. And this time we're going to be dealing with mushrooms that are potentially deadly in their toxicity. So let's just continue here. The genre that we'll be looking at today are Gyromitra, Paxillus, Pluricibella, and Tricoloma. So what to expect from this presentation? Toxic mushrooms that are consumed regardless of their toxicity, toxic mushrooms that are rendered edible through special preparations, and mushrooms that have caused and continue to cause, now and in the future, certainly, fatalities. So the first mushroom that we're going to look at is the deadly false morel, Gyromitra esculenta. So, if you recall from our false morel presentation, a lot of the mushrooms that we looked at there in the Gyromitra genus had look-alike alerts for this particular mushroom here. So, the deadly false morel, let's start. The ASCII is tan to brown to violet in coloration. It is spherical, ovoid, or eccentric. It is covered with brain-like lobes and wrinkles. It has a cartilaginous texture to it, like if you squeeze it. It will give a bit and then it will break. It is velvety or smooth, so when it's younger, it's going to be more velvety than when it's older. It is chambered if you were to cut it in half, and it grows up to about 4 inches high and 3 inches wide and has a yellow spore print. Here is a size reference for you. If you recall the other Gyromitras that we looked at, they tend to have a much thicker stipe. So there is the stipe. That's about at its thickest. Usually it's a bit thinner than that, as we just saw. They are cream to tan in coloration. They can be longitudinally ribbed, like what you're seeing here. They are bulbous, so they tend to have a bit of a bulb at the end. And they are solid or with small chambers if you cut them in half. And they're up to about 3 inches high and usually 2 inches wide at their widest. And just look again there. I think that's a bit of a better reference for what the stipe you can expect from the stipe. In terms of the ecology, they are both saprobic and mycorrhizal. They are found under conifers. They are found in areas with sandy soil. They are terrestrial. They occur early spring, and they are solitary to scattered. And with that name, False Morel, you can pretty much assume from that that this will be a spring species. If it grew in the fall, we wouldn't have to worry about confusing it with a morel. So there you can see the morel, a yellow morel there next to the deadly false morel. So the morel is on the right. That's a Morchella species, and you can see almost like hexagon ridges on the morel. On the left, it's more like wrinkled lobes, like a brain. So if you compare, say, honeycomb to the lobes of a brain, it becomes very easy then to tell the two apart. In terms of the edibility, these are considered to be choice mushrooms. They're readily eaten in both North America and in Europe. They use a double parboiling technique to reduce the toxicity, and I will get to that in a second here. Now, in terms of the toxicity, this is potentially lethal if consumed raw. It contains gyromitrin. This is one of the ingredients used to make rocket fuel. So if you can imagine drinking rocket fuel, not going to be very good for you. Now, when you expose this to heat, it turns into monomethylhydrazine, and that's what's the toxin here. And that's also what it reverts to in your stomach, and that's very, very toxic. It causes nausea, bloody diarrhea, dizziness, lethargy, tremors, loss of your motor functions, vertigo, fever, seizures, coma, jaundice, and then finally liver and kidney failure, and then death as a result of all that. So, having said that, you can reduce it to monomethylhydrazine by boiling it, and monomethylhydrazine is water soluble. So if you put the gyromitra into cold water, bring it to a full-on boil, leave it for like 5 to 10 minutes, then remove them and put them in another pot with cold water, dump out the water that it was boiled in, of course, and then put it into new, fresh, cold water and repeat that process, you can actually remove upwards of 95%. At that point, it is safe to consume. It's not going to actually do any serious immediate damage to your body. It will, however, remain a carcinogen. As to how bad of a carcinogen, I have no idea. Like I said, I'm not a doctor or a toxicologist, so but that is how people do consume this mushroom, and have done so for many, many decades. The next mushroom is the hooded elfin saddle, Gyromitra infola. There is also Gyromitra ambigua, which looks identical to this mushroom, so we'll just consider this representative of both of those mushrooms, both of which supposedly occur in Saskatchewan. I've seen one. I don't know if it's infula or ambigua, but I've only seen this once. But we'll just use infula for now. So the asci is tan to brown to red in coloration. It is usually bilobed and saddle shaped, as you can see here. That's where basically both ends curl upwards and form this sort of saddle shape. Sometimes it will be trilobed, or it will be just completely eccentric in its shape, just like a blob. It is cartilaginous, just like most of the Ascomycotae are. It becomes wrinkled with age. You can see it's a bit wrinkled now, and it will be continue to become more wrinkled as it ages, and that's where the spores are developed. And it produces a yellow spore print. These grow up to about 5 inches high and 4 inches wide. Here's a size reference for you. So the stipe is cream with tan or bluish undertones, which you can kind of see there. They darken with age, more into like a tan or kind of like a brown. It might be ribbed. More often than not, it isn't. They are clavate or bulbous. And clavate, if you recall, is kind of like a club shape where it's increasing in width gradually as it reaches the base. And then these grow up to about 3 inches high and an inch wide at their widest. There you can see that brown that I was talking about in the coloration of the stipe. You can also see this is a trilobed specimen. These are saprobic mushrooms. They are found either terrestrial, or else they will also be found growing directly on rotting wood. And it can be coniferous or deciduous. So it has a wide range in Saskatchewan as a result. These occur late summer and fall, and they are scattered to gregarious. In terms of the edibility, they're relatively poor from what I hear. I've never eaten this one. Again, you use that same double parboiling technique to reduce the toxicity. In terms of the toxicity itself, same thing, contains gyromitrin in large quantities, just like the deadly false morel, and this can kill you in the exact same manner. The next mushroom we have is the angel wings, Plurosabella porogens. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I've never seen this mushroom, and I have doubts if it actually even occurs in Saskatchewan, but it is widespread in North America. It grows on conifers, has a preference for hemlock, and it's hemlock that I'm assuming keeps this from being prevalent in Saskatchewan, if here at all, because I don't believe that tree actually occurs in Saskatchewan naturally. And we'll just continue here regardless. So the cap is white and it turns kind of a beige with age. You can see that happening in the photo here. The caps are semicircular or shaped kind of like a tongue. I'll show you that a bit more in a second. They are sessile. Now, if you recall from the terminology and from the polypore presentations, sessile means that it occurs without a stipe. The cap simply ends and connects directly to the wood that it's growing from. These are smooth on the surface if you run your finger along it. The margin is downturned and smooth or scalloped, and you can see it's kind of scalloped in this photo here. These grow up to about 4 inches in diameter, but usually smaller. See a size reference here. You can also see some of those tongue shapes, right, where it's kind of curved with the back curving in the way it is, curving outwards. The gills are white to beige. They are decurrent in that they run down the entire length of the cap, but there is no stipe, so I guess you can't get much more decurrent than that. They are close together. The short gills are frequent. They do occur 2 to 3 between each gill there, and this produces a white spore print. These are saprobic mushrooms that grow directly from rotting conifers. If you recall, most of the oysters will be found growing from hardwoods. So that is the difference here between these two. These are preferential to very decayed wood, very decayed coniferous wood, often wood that's covered in moss. And they grow gregariously. They cluster together in dense shelves. And these are found late summer through fall. In terms of edibility, these are choice. They are readily consumed in North America, Europe, and Asia. They are potentially lethal. However, this lethality has only been noted in Japan, to my knowledge, where there was a string of deaths. And this leads me to wonder if it isn't perhaps some sort of localized some sort of localized condition that caused this, maybe a chemical spill or something like that in the area. The people that were killed all had prior liver damage as well. I think it's important to note that despite this being readily eaten in North America for decades, if not hundreds of years, there has never been a reported poisoning here. But it is, I think, important to let you know that it has occurred, so you can make a choice on that matter if this is something you find and want to pick. I've also included it as a look-alike alert on all of the oyster mushrooms in the oyster presentation. Okay, so the next species we're going to look at is the brown roll rim mushroom, Paxillus involutus. This mushroom, I believe, in Saskatchewan also goes by the common name of wood chanterelle. It is an interesting mushroom, and I'll discuss what makes it so interesting when we get to the edibility and toxicity portion. So the cap is brown to yellow-brown, and it is darkest at the center. It is convex with a slight central depression. The profile can be circular, more often is circular than not, but it can also be eccentric. And what we're looking at here on the right is actually a more eccentric profile, I would say, as it seems to dip in on the bottom part there. So if you were looking at this mushroom from above, you would not be able to say that that is a circle. It is smooth to the touch. It has a deeply enrolled margin, so not just downturned, but it actually rolls up underneath. And that margin is also tomentose, so it's kind of fuzzy. It's got some fibers hanging off of it. It is very firm, and it is surprisingly light in weight. So it feels like very densely packed styrofoam. You know, when you get like a package and the styrofoam is very, very thick and dense and it's hard to break it, that is very much what this mushroom is like when you try to break it in half. It feels very, very light, but it's very, very tough. And it grows up to about 6 inches in diameter, so it's a good sized mushroom. Here's the size reference for you. And you can see that kind of fuzzy, deeply enrolled margin on the left-hand side. And you can also, again, see how eccentric that profile can look. So the gills are beige to yellowish brown, and they turn cinnamon brown with age. They are adnate to the current, so they'll either reach across and touch the mushroom, or they'll reach across and dip down slightly. Short gills are frequent between those regular gills. And if you look there, look closely, you'll notice that the gills are forked near the stipe. So before they reach the stipe, they often fork together. And as well, this mushroom is covered with a courtna when young, not with the partial veil that so many other mushrooms tend to have. It's more like that spider web courtna that we see in the Cortinarius genus. And this produces a brown spore print. And there's a spore print for you. The stipe is light brown, bruising darker brown. It is cylindrical, so the same width from apex to base. It forms a central or eccentric attachment to the cap. So when I say eccentric, it means it can be off-center. And it is very, again, fibrous and tough. Hard to break it sometimes. It grows up to about 4 inches high and 2 inches thick. So these are mycorrhizal with hardwoods and conifers, and they are terrestrial. And rarely they do become saprobic and attach directly onto wood. So it's quite a versatile mushroom, that's for sure. They are solitary to scattered. They're very, very common in Saskatoon and in Regina and in Saskatchewan. In general, they grow on lawns where there are other trees growing on the lawn. That's where I always see them. In fact, they are in my parents' front yard. These are found summer through fall. So these are considered a choice edible and have been for some time. Now, they are potentially fatal. So when we've been talking about mushrooms thus far, I've kind of thrown around the term allergen a lot. None of these mushrooms really are allergens up till now. They have been sensitivities. So sensitivities don't require the presence of an antigen. Sensitivities is just your body reacting to something in the food itself that is not an antigen, and they tend to be fairly mild. They don't tend to be fatal, right? When somebody has a mushroom sensitivity, they don't die from it. They're just on the toilet from it. There is, however, in this mushroom, an antigen that causes the body's immune system to attack its own red blood cells. Now, when we're talking about serious allergies, right? I mean, we wouldn't consider a peanut toxic. But here's the difference between a peanut and this mushroom here. So a peanut, generally speaking, you realize you have a serious allergy to it right when you eat it the first time, right? I mean, after that, you just know to avoid it. With this mushroom, it actually builds those antigens up in your body over time, and you don't react to it until there's a lot of those antigens in there. And more often than not, when you have a reaction to this mushroom, because you won't know you're allergic, you've been eating it sometimes for decades, when you have a reaction, the reaction is fatal. There's often nothing that can be done. It just rips through your body, destroys the red blood cells, destroys your kidneys, and you're done. So that's why I suggest people consider this mushroom as toxic, because this wasn't even really known until recently. And the reason was because the people that died from this mushroom, again, had been often eating it for years without any sort of reaction to it. And people weren't putting two and two together that this fatal condition was actually resultant of a mushroom that was commonly eaten. So it isn't even known how many people in past years have died from this, right? So it's something to consider. The next mushroom we're going to look at, the next two actually, both have the same sort of, again, a type of reaction that causes certain people to die, but are commonly eaten and were commonly eaten up until recent times. In fact, many guidebooks from even the 90s will still record these mushrooms as edible, as opposed to potentially fatal. So the first one is the gray knight, and this is Tricholomaterium. This is a commonly eaten species, and up until recent times it was much sought after. So the gray, the cap is gray, and it's paler on the umbo and the margin, and with kind of like almost like a band of darker gray in the middle zone there. It is campanulate, kind of shaped like an old-fashioned bell in a bell tower, and it flattens out and becomes either umbinate or umbilicate. So umbinate is where you're flat with a lump at the top, a little umbo. Umbilicate is where you're kind of depressed like a cup with an umbo in the middle. These have a circular or eccentric profile if you're looking straight down on it. They are fibrillose. It looks like it has like almost like depressed fibers. And you can see that very clearly in this photo here. It's almost rug-like in its appearance. The margin is striate and sometimes tomentose. Sometimes those hairs will be hanging down. You can see that actually here too. And as this flattens out, the cap, it will often split along those striations. And this cap grows up to about 3 inches in diameter. So about the size of a button mushroom, a big button mushroom. You can see some size references here. So the gills are pale gray in color. They're sinuate. So they have like almost like a trench where they come, they dip down and they touch, but they create a trench. They go down usually and come back up a bit. They're close together. Short gills do occur frequently between the regular sized gills, and looks like there's several lengths of short gills there too. And this produces a white spore print like all Tricholoma does, the whole genus. If you recall our presentation on night mushrooms. The stipe is off-white to pale gray. It is cylindrical, basically the same width throughout its length, and it forms a central or an off-center or eccentric attachment to the cap. And then these grow up to about 2 inches high and about a ½ inch thick. These are mycorrhizal with conifers. So if you can imagine, they would be pretty frequent up in the upper half of this province. They are scattered to gregarious. You can see them clumping together there in large groups. And they are found spring through fall. These are considered, again, choice edibles. They were, and probably still are, much sought after. It is now known that these are potentially fatal. So there is an unknown toxin in them. It still isn't identified what it is, but this toxin causes a condition known as rhabdomyolysis. I think I'm saying that right. And it causes this over time. So it's a gradual occurrence where this toxin builds up in your body, and then what it does once it's there in sufficient quantities, it breaks down your muscles. And the byproduct of that builds up in your kidneys, I believe, and possibly liver, and kills them. So that is a very serious condition, right? It leads to death and leads to kidney and liver damage. So it's not something to take lightly. Having said that, there are, as of yet, no known North American poisonings. All of the poisonings have occurred in Europe. So that is something to keep in mind. The next mushroom here is, again, one of the most sought after mushrooms that I know of. This is the yellow knight Trichoma equestre that was also considered up until recent decades to be safe to eat and much sought after. A very beautiful mushroom too, bright yellow. In fact, the name yellow knight or man on horseback comes from medieval times, because this would be the mushroom that the knights would get when they came to market, and probably the gray knights or the other knights would be the ones given to the peasants, or whatever you call them. I'm not a historian, so don't jump on me. The cap is bright yellow to yellowish green, turning brown in the center with age. You can see that's starting to happen there. They are convex to campanulate, flattening with age, and then sometimes retaining an umbo in the middle there and becoming umbinate or umbilicate. Kind of very similar, in fact, to the last mushroom in terms of its cap shape and profile. These are circular to eccentric in shape, if you look straight down on them in terms of their profile. And they have a smooth margin that is down rolled when young, and then kind of lifts upwards as it ages. And then this mushroom would be about, I don't know, maybe up to 5 inches at its most in terms of length. Here you can see a size reference for you. The gills are yellow in color. They're sinuate, so they form that trench that go down and up, and they are crowded together. There are short gills present, but not numerous, and this again produces a white spore print. The stipe is yellow, sometimes turning white at the base and or the apex. I have this feeling that when it does turn white at the apex, it's because of a white spore deposit. That would make sense to me. This is, again, cylindrical to clavate, so sometimes it will begin to increase in its width towards the base. It is central to eccentric in attachment to the cap, and it is fibrous and up to about 3 inches high and a half-inch thick. You can actually see the longitudinal grooves that usually indicate a fibrous stipe, like that. These are mycorrhizal with pines, so you'll see them in areas with jack pine. They are terrestrial, very much preferential to sandy soil, so jack pine near lakes. They are gregarious and found summer through fall. In terms of their edibility, they are choice, and they are potentially fatal. Again, there is that unknown toxin that is yet to be identified, causing rhabdomyolysis over time. And once again, no known North American poisonings, but there have been a number of fatal poisonings in Europe. And since this discovery is relatively new, and it was recently considered to be edible, to say there is no known North, I emphasize the word known North American poisonings because for the several hundred years before that, who knows how many people have perished as a result of developing this condition and not actually knowing that it was tied to a mushroom. And that is everything in terms of the deadly delicacies of Saskatchewan. So I hope you enjoyed that presentation, and I will see you next time for another one. This is the Mushroom Wizard, and have a good weekend.